Dean, what a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
It's great to be here because I think we're going to create a powerhouse in India that will be supporting tens of millions of kids there and getting them excited about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
That is the future. Collaboration between the two of the biggest democracies, open societies, and sharing of knowledge, obviously. I want to come back to empowering the younger generation, but I want to start with you, the first robotics. If I go back, when was your first interest tinkering with these things?
As a kid, I never did well at school. I thought it was very structured, and I think innovation is about getting outside of structure. I came to realize how important school is. It's a very efficient way to learn all the laws of physics, and you can't start from scratch. If you don't know mathematics, the language of science, if you don't learn from all the great geniuses that ever lived, from Archimedes' principle to Newton's laws, you'll never get anywhere. But as a kid, I always found it more interesting to ask the questions for which the answer isn't already in the back of the book. And so as I got to be a young adult, I realized that I'm not the only kid that was, let's say, frustrated or bored that we were learning all the rules, but we weren't being allowed to play the game. And so I said, I'm going to make a program that'll show kids how much fun science and technology and inventing is, how accessible it is, and how it can lead to careers. And that's why I formed FIRST.
I don't know if it's the right thing or the wrong thing, because I think kids are getting the wrong impression that you don't have to be good at studies if you want to be a genius. But as you said, math is very, very critical, and that's where most kids have struggled with. But then moving on, robotics, AI has been there for 30 plus years. But do you think that the time is right now? It's almost like a tipping point for AI?
I think for so many reasons, computers have become much friendlier. Large language models, being able to talk to a computer, and it still does what it always did well, massively sophisticated calculation, massively sophisticated data manipulation, but you don't have to know colon backslash. The structure by which humans used to have to deal with, frankly, crude interfaces is going away. The computers are getting better, faster, more powerful, lower energy consumption, lower cost per unit. They're becoming more accessible to more people. They have more power, and the abstract levels of interface to them went from bits and bytes when it started, then to assembly code, and then to compiled code. Now you talk to the computer. So I think we're reaching a place where, yes, computers will start to become much, much more accessible in a meaningful way. But kids need to get the basics. They need to understand what's going on in order to be able to use these tools.
Talk about computers, especially with AI, taking away a lot of regular mundane jobs from the population. But do you think computers can ever be brighter and smarter than humans? Because at the end of the day, humans do create all these machines.
I think the strongest opinions you always hear on this issue about computers taking over, the strongest opinions in both directions have one thing in common. Those really strong opinions come from a group of people that know the least about what a computer is and what it does. The optimists think it's going to solve all our problems and it'll cure all our diseases. And the pessimists think it's the Terminator. And they're both wrong. It's a tool, like every other tool. And I think history has shown that every time a new technology comes along, those people with the loudest voices in the middle, the naive ones that think it'll solve our problems, they said electricity was going to be so cheap it wouldn't even be metered. And the other side, major cities were banning electricity when it first came out because it was going to leak out of the wall and electrocute everybody. Every new technology scares some people and makes others naively think it's the solution, when in reality, every new technology really has one thing in common. If it's a powerful enough tool to do really good, to amplify good, It's a tool. It amplifies anything, which means it can amplify bad. So we as humans have to do two things. We have to understand how to use it for good, and we have to recognize that if the good people don't learn how to make sure that the bad people don't have more control and more effective use of these tools, then the net result will be a bad world. And so I think FIRST isn't just about showing kids what the technology is. FIRST is about showing kids what we call not a competition, but a cooperation. We show the kids that they learn how to communicate and cooperate and share so that the net result is the world's a better place. And technology, unlike most things, is not a zero-sum game. History has shown that people go to war because you have land, I need land, I fight over your land. There's only a fixed amount of land. That's true about water. It's true about oil. It's true about gold. It's not true about ideas. If somebody in India comes up with a great idea to cure a disease, and somebody in America comes up with a great idea to make more energy available with less environmental impact, they each have one good idea. If they share those ideas with each other, now each of them has two good ideas. And the more ideas grow, the faster humanity will grow. And I think we have to recognize with 8 billion people and growing, and a fragile world, which is getting more fragile, we're either going to learn how to communicate and cooperate and solve our problems together to make this world a much better place, or the alternative is pretty terrifying.
I want to switch gears for this question to your most famous and, if I may say, a sexy product, Segway. I would like to call it the Tesla for personal mobility before Tesla came out, and you can pay me for that. So on that product and its huge success and adoption by the market.
So just to be clear, almost every product I've ever developed is medical. And even the Segway came from a product that we spent 4 or 5 years working on called an iBot, a balancing device that would move disabled people around, paraplegics and quadriplegics. It would let them come up to eye level. It wasn't just mobility, it was dignity, it was access, it was independence. And we worked so hard to make this balancing thing work and make it safe and reliable. We said, you know, to get the volume of components up, to bring the overall cost down, and because it's fun, why don't we take the seat off of it? Why don't we take what we call the cluster off of it and just take a simple subset of the iBot and put it on a platform that still self-balances using the same, literally the same code and the same accelerometers and gyroscopes as the iBot had, and we made it. But it suddenly became very exciting to people that we had this thing that balanced like a human and went cruising around quietly and efficiently in a pedestrian environment. And so now it's 25 years later, and even though we've made an enormous number of systems, like at one point most of the insulin pumps for diabetes and most of the home peritoneal dialysis machines for the world, we've made a lot of medical products, iBots. To this day, I'm still known as the Segway guy. But frankly, I hope by the end of my career, when you look back at FIRST Global, iBots, and everything else I've done, the Segway is a footnote to my career.
I want to come back to inspiring and empowering the younger generation. As you said, fundamentals are very important. You cannot miss that. But then the methodology of education, of how we impart education to students, have to change. So some thoughts on that.
Again, I think there's a naive assumption that you can put kids in a classroom, open up their head, and pour in knowledge. And if the kid doesn't come away with a lot of knowledge, we blame the education system. I think that's very naive. Kids are going to learn what they want to learn, and the most important thing you can do is inspire them to recognize, A, how accessible and how much fun it is to learn, particularly things that normally are intimidating, like mathematics. And I have found over the years that kids will say, I don't like science. And I'll say, really? You didn't like Star Trek? Oh, no, I like that. You didn't like... And then you talk about all the science fiction that they love, because it's imagination. And I say to these kids, you said you don't like science, but you love science fiction. The only difference between science and science fiction is timing. Every generation creates science fiction, and they're so inspired by it that by the next generation, they make it real. When I was a kid, cloning was science fiction. We grew up with things, Terminator. Well, now, at Army, we're manufacturing cells, tissues, and organs. 100 years ago, it was science fiction to make rockets. You look at what the science fiction was back then. Now, kids think all of that's part of life. So I think the most important thing to get into kids when they're still young is the idea that if they're willing to work hard at it, they can develop that muscle hanging between their ears, and they can actually understand the world around them, which is a powerful and exciting thing. But too many kids are turned off, I think, because we ram into them so many complex things that don't have context for them. They can understand cricket, right? You hit this, you do that, you run. They can understand it. If they spend 10 years studying cricket, getting quizzes and tests about what cricket is, but never got to play, it would not be a big deal in India. Well, when you think about how we teach mathematics, after they learn counting and numbers and then geometry and algebra and calculus, and it's intimidating. And what do you use that for? Oh, that's a second order inhomogeneous partial differential equation. What would I do with that? Well, when your car hits the ice and slides into a tree because it won't turn and it won't stop, kids are pretty excited by things like that. Well, that's Newton's second law, but you got to explain it in a way that's relevant. And I think when you give kids a kit full of stuff like FIRST, and they get to see, hey, they told me about voltage and current and resistance and torque. I got to make that motor move. And I want that robot to go further. And I want it to go faster. And I want to shoot that ball higher. All of a sudden, in order to be able to do that, they got to learn a little bit of mathematics. And they got to learn a little bit of mechanical stuff and electrical stuff and the laws of physics. And suddenly it becomes real to them. And once it's real, it would be like saying, here, let's go play football or basketball or cricket. And then they want to be better at it, and they see themselves getting better at it. But school has made much of, particularly math and science, so abstract and so esoteric that the kids don't get into it until they're older, and by then it's a little hard to start them over again. So FIRST wants to get young kids right away into appreciating the power of science and technology and engineering.
Dean, before I ask my last question, I would like to tell you that the future is far ahead for cloning ourselves. If I had the opportunity, I would clone many of you and put it out there. So
Be careful what you wish for.
You can inspire so many other kids out there. My last question to you is, you talked about India and collaborating with India. IIT, one of the most, if it's not one of the, is the most premier institutions in India, and the alumni, as you see across US, have done amazingly well, and you are at their conference, the PanIIT Global Conference. Your take on IITians and the experience at the conference?
Well, as you said, although I'm an American and don't know much about India, there's a few things I do know. IIT is considered the premier institution, particularly when it comes to, of course, STEM, in one of the largest populations in the world, and it tends to be a culture that really, really respects the power of education, and again, particularly technical education. So I realized if I could come to Washington and in one place at one time talk to alums that probably spanned 20 or 30 years of experience after leaving there, and if I could let them understand that in this country they can help us build enough teams with their mentorship that every kid can have access to FIRST, and if they could reach back into their alums, into the 20 some odd campuses in India and back to where their villages and their schools, and say, hey, India has got to give more kids what FIRST is. inspiration and recognition of science and technology. And if IIT can help us get to more of those kids and inspire them to see what the world could be like for them if they develop that muscle hanging between their ears, it will have the biggest impact that they've ever had. Whatever their job is here, the legacy of people, if they can truly create in the next generation a substantial increase in the number of kids capable of becoming positive resources in solving technical problems, the world is in desperate need for that. India should be a powerhouse for creating that next generation, and I'm hoping that today we officially kicked off with that memorandum of understanding, a partnership between First Global and IIT that's going to have enormous impact on the world.
Great. Thank you for doing what you do. You have done amazing contributions, and I wish you continued success to create more of those. More importantly, inspire the younger generations. Thank you, Dean. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll stay in touch.